So, you think you've got what it takes to lead the crazy powerful armies of Red Alert 3, do you? If you want to start racking up those wins like nobody's business, you've come to the right place. Coming up, I'll show you some uber strategies for the Soviets, the Allies, and the Empire of the Rising Sun. Plus, I've got the lowdown on Red Alert 3's deadly commandos. You don't want to get on these girls' bad side. And I'll introduce you to the game's campaign experience as well, with a complete Soviet mission walkthrough. No worries, no spoilers. Now, before you dive on in, let me give you an introduction to the strategies, units, and essential mechanics of RA3 right here on Command School. You're watching the premiere edition of Command School. I'm Greg Kasavin. Congratulations, comrade, for if you're watching this, chances are you're a proud owner of the Red Alert 3 Premiere Edition. While sitting around waiting for the game to install, or maybe taking a breather between RA3's wild battles, please sit back and listen to some in-depth tips straight from the dev team. One of the twists in Red Alert 3 is that each faction has a unique base building mechanic, and the differences aren't just for show. The Allies are the closest to what you may be familiar with from previous Command & Conquer games. You build each structure within your construction yard, paying out its cost in credits over time. Once it's built, you can plant it down on the map and start using it immediately. However, in contrast to previous games, your base's build radius is only extended by your construction yard or your command hubs. And if you want to build more than one structure at a time, you'll need to crank out a second MCV. Unlike the Allies, you can place Soviet buildings on the map right away, though it still takes time for them to build up. During this process, they're unusable and vulnerable to attack. On the other hand, Soviet build radius is extended anytime you build a new structure, and the Soviets have access to a unique structure in the Crusher Crane, which lets you build multiple structures at the same time, repair vehicles, or scrap them for credits. Last but not least, the Empire of the Rising Sun has a very different way of constructing its bases by using special amphibious units called nanocores. These are basically portable structures used to construct all of your buildings wherever you want. Cores are expensive, defenseless, and vulnerable even while they build up. But on the other hand, the Empire isn't limited by a build radius at all. They can spread out quickly and expand faster than the other two factions. Now that you know how each faction builds its structures, let's review how to get support powers in Red Alert 3. Don't you worry about having to spend precious credits to research new support powers when you could just as soon be spending that cash on additional units. Instead, you accumulate a special currency called security points. You earn these over time. The more carnage that's happening at any given moment, the faster you'll rack them up. Simply staying alive is the slowest way to generate security points, though they're always accumulating. Blowing up a bunch of enemy units over time will net you more points, but they're generated the fastest when your own armies are being destroyed. Consider that one of the only perks to getting a beatdown in Red Alert 3. Once you've accumulated a point, you can cash it in for a new support power, also called a top secret protocol. Each faction has 3 unique ability trees and 15 support powers, so there's a lot of room for customization. You can balance out your army by picking powers from all 3 trees, or put all your effort into getting the top power in one branch. One other strategy to consider as you build up your forces is laying down some walls. Walls can prevent those pesky enemy engineers and spies from getting into your base, and they can protect your ore collectors. They can also channel enemy forces right where you want them to go. Building walls is simple. Place a wall piece from your support structure's build queue, then place another piece within a few grid spaces along the same line as the first one. Before you click, make sure the build preview is green and you're good to go. Now then, it's time to put all 3 factions under the microscope and delve into their unique units, strategies, and powers. First up are the Allies in Casual 1. First things first, you should know how the Allies tech up. In Red Alert 3, higher tech tiers unlock more powerful units, and the teching process is different for each faction. As you know, Allied construction yards and command hubs each provide a set amount of build radius. This radius is also linked to how the Allies tech up. Purchase the Heightened Clearance upgrade from a con yard or a command hub, and all of the unit-creating structures within its radius will be teched up. Once you've done that, you can also purchase the Max Clearance upgrade to access the absolute strongest weapons in the field. Don't forget to tech up your expansion bases. Simply buying Heightened Clearance on your main construction yard won't help your structures across the map. All right, now for some strategies. Early in the game, you'll have access to Peacekeepers. These guys are great to have on the front line because of their secondary ability, the Riot Shield. Throw up that shield by selecting your peacekeepers and hitting the F key, or pressing the ability button in the corner of the screen. Now they'll be a bit slower and unable to attack, but the shield will protect them from enemy gunfire. Close the distance and throw off the shield to use their powerful but shorter range shotgun. Or leave their riot shields up to draw enemy fire while your secondary line attacks. While we're on the subject of special abilities, did you know that you can trigger them even with multiple unit types selected? In your selection group, one unit type will always be highlighted. Pressing the F key will trigger just that unit type's ability, and you can also press the Tab key to change the highlighted unit type within your selection. This makes managing multiple units' abilities much easier. An incredibly versatile early game vehicle for the Allies is the Multi-Gunner IFV, also known as the Infantry Fighting Vehicle. On its own, the IFV has a basic missile attack mostly effective against enemy aircraft. But it truly shines when you load different soldiers into it, as each type of infantry customizes the IFV's weapon in a unique way. Peacekeepers provide a massive anti-infantry shotgun, attack dogs' loudspeakers will stun nearby enemies, and a javelin soldier will boost the IFV's anti-air power, to name a few. Oh, and sticking an engineer in an IFV allows it to repair all nearby vehicles, and even remove those pesky Soviet terror drones. So, an army of IFVs loaded with different infantry types and one or two engineers turns out to make for a well-balanced attack group early on. If you come up against enemy aircraft, be sure to evacuate your peacekeepers or attack dogs so the IFV's default anti-air missiles can take care of them. While IFVs can transport infantry around, they're limited to moving on land and can only carry one other unit at a time. So if you need to transport a bunch of forces someplace, the Allies' Riptide ACV is likely the way to go. Riptides have a powerful torpedo attack when traveling by sea, and they've got a heavy anti-infantry machine gun for good measure. One of these can also carry 5 infantry units. A good strategy here is to put 5 Javelin soldiers into laser-guided mode, their special ability, and then transport them using the Riptide. When you come across an enemy structure, evacuate the Javelins and use the Riptide to deal with any enemy troops. In laser-guided mode, the Javelins will take longer to fire, but then discharge a ton of missiles quickly. This type of attack can destroy just about anything in a matter of seconds. Or if you aren't feeling like taking care of the enemy by land, maybe an air strategy is right for you. The first aircraft you can build as the Allies is the Vindicator, a tactical bomber. The Allies can get to these bombers faster than any other faction, so use this to your advantage. Build a few Vindicators and snipe the enemy's armored forces or ore collectors early on, before he can crank up his anti-air. Once you get heightened clearance, you can then build the Cryocopter. This unit has no weapons per se, but it's a huge asset for your army. Its primary attack, the Cryo Beam, will freeze enemy units or structures. The more Cryocopters focus in on a target, the faster it'll freeze. Then, any single shot fired on a frozen unit or structure will cause it to shatter. Not even the likes of the Soviet Apocalypse tank is safe from such a combat. There are also some cryo-related support powers that can freeze everything in a radius. The most advanced of these, Cryogeddon, has a significant range and lasts a while, so if the enemy is clustering all his ground forces together, he'd better watch out. The Cryocopter also has a slick special ability in the Shrink Ray. This thing makes units smaller and weaker, but also much faster. Use it on the enemy to gain the upper hand, and if you're feeling brave, you can even zap your own army to charge across the battlefield as quickly as possible. And to top it all off, shrunken units sound completely ridiculous.
Ready to roll.
If the fight is still raging on, even after you've been using your Cryocopters and support powers for a while, chances are you're in the late game. So purchase that max clearance upgrade and deploy some of those top-tier units. From your armor facility, you can build the Allies' ever-dangerous Mirage tank. When it isn't moving, this tank disguises itself to look like part of the environment from the enemy's point of view. With any luck, he'll think he's gone nuts when all those trees start blasting his tanks to smithereens. Mirage tanks aren't disguised while moving and break out of the disguise for a second while firing, but the disguise is still great for setting up an ambush. Mirage tanks also have a useful special ability in the Gap Generator. This cloaks all nearby infantry and vehicles, letting you mass an army without tipping your hand to the enemy commander, although the Mirage tank can't fire or disguise itself while it's in this mode. Mirage tanks and ground forces are great against ground targets, but what if your opponent's base is out on the water? Cue the Allies' top-tier naval unit, the aircraft carrier. This long-range bombardment ship sends squadrons of attack drones to bomb enemy forces back to the Stone Age. And if you need a little extra help, the carrier's special ability, the Blackout Missile, will power down enemy ships and structures with an EMP attack. The Allies have other excellent naval combat options in the Assault Destroyer, which doubles as a damage-soaking tank on land, and the Hydrofoil, which can disable enemy weapons and tear through aircraft. So don't neglect a naval strategy when playing as the good guys. Once you've taken out his land and sea defenses, it's time to carpet bomb the enemy's base and finish this thing. That's where your max clearance aircraft comes in, the Century Bomber. It's both a bomber and a troop transport, so load up Tanya and some javelins before taking off. Use its special ability to paradrop the infantry, then bomb the living daylights out of your opponent's base. If you're fighting a Soviet player, be sure to target his super reactor first and enjoy the fireworks. But what if you are that Soviet player? Let's check out what the Soviets can do to fight back in Casual 2. First of all, the Soviets tech up differently than the Allies. It's the most straightforward way of all three factions. Just build a specific structure to build new types of units. For example, after building a reactor and an ore refinery, you can build a super reactor. The super reactor by itself is like a huge power plant, supplying many times the power of a normal power plant, but it also unlocks your second-tier tech. Then, after building a super reactor, you can build a battle lab, which unlocks your highest-tier units. As mentioned, the Soviets also have a unique structure in the Crusher Crane. Apart from the construction yard, it's the only structure in the game that grants you a second build queue, meaning the Soviets can build up a base quicker than the other two factions. The Crusher Crane also has other unique abilities. It can repair vehicles or salvage them for cash if you need an economy boost. Build this thing early on to repair or expand your economy. And if you're fighting a mirror match against another Soviet player, the Crusher Crane can be especially important since it'll let you repair units infected by terror drones. While building up your own economy, you can dismantle your opponents early in the game by using that notorious terror drone. Terror drones are great early in the game because of their speed and unique abilities. They're lightly armored robots that can dig into enemy vehicles, dealing damage over time and eventually destroying the vehicle completely. The only way your terror drone can be removed is if the vehicle is repaired. Its special ability is the Electrostasis Ray, which prevents the target vehicle from moving, though it can still attack. Use these abilities to infect your enemy's ore collectors and also pin them in place to prevent them from gathering resources or running to a repair structure. What's more, terror drones are amphibious, and they can kill most infantry in one shot. Another good early game tactic is to use the Soviet Sickle to decimate infantry. The Sickle's 3 anti-infantry machine guns just mow down enemy troops. You can also use the Sickle's special ability, the Flea Jump, to land on and squish infantry or get onto higher ground. Elevation in Red Alert 3 can give you a huge advantage, as your opponent will not be able to see units that are on higher ground. Try using a couple of sickles to prevent your opponent from sending out lone engineers to capture neutral tech structures on the map. Of course, Soviet war bears are also great at hunting down enemy engineers running out in the open. Speaking of tech structures, try loading up a combat engineer, conscript, and 3 flak troopers into a bullfrog to go capture a neutral tech structure like an oil derrick or a hospital. Use the man cannon to shoot those infantry toward the structure, and before capturing it with your engineer, use his special ability to build a battle bunker for your remaining troops. The flak troopers will take care of any aircraft flying over, or you can evacuate them and use their magnetic mines against any vehicles. Meanwhile, your lone conscript will eliminate enemy engineers trying to grab your structures. Once you build a super reactor, you'll have access to the Hammer tank, the main battle tank of the Soviets. What makes this tank so cool is its special ability, the Leech Beam. Attack an enemy vehicle with the Hammer's main gun, but don't kill it. Then use the Leech Beam to finish it off. The beam will slowly kill the vehicle and steal its weapon. Then switch back to primary attack mode to take advantage of the additional firepower. The Leech Beam will also restore some of the Hammer tank's health, but it doesn't deal as much damage as the main gun. Now get your battle lab up and running, and then build some deadly V4 rocket launchers. These lethal launchers rain death down from above with long-range missiles, which are extremely effective against structures and stationary targets. Use some twin-blade helicopters to transport your V4s to elevated ground behind your enemy's base, and let the decimation begin. The twin blade can also use its weapons to help protect itself and its cargo while carrying either 5 infantry or a vehicle. The Soviets also have an awesome 1-2 combo using the magnetic satellite and orbital drop support powers. Use the magnetic satellite to pull enemy vehicles, including ore collectors, into space. The target of the satellite is a selectable object that can be slowly moved around while the power is active. Then follow up with orbital drop to rain down decommissioned satellites orbiting the Earth. the third-level version of this power drops an entire space station down on the battlefield. And if you used magnetic satellite beforehand, any vehicles that were sucked up into the sky will also come raining down as damaging debris. This is a great area of effect anti-surface attack. If you haven't already destroyed the opposing player using those powers, it's time to pile on the pain using the Soviets' late-game units, the Apocalypse tank, the Kirov airship, and the Dreadnought. These top-tier units dish out all kinds of destruction on land, in the air, or on the high seas. The Apocalypse tank makes its comeback with devastating dual cannons, which lay waste to all vehicles and structures in their path. And its special ability will grind up the competition. The Magnetic Harpoon uses a tractor beam to pull vehicles into its grinders, crushing them down into bite-sized bits. Meanwhile, the Kirov airship is the single deadliest aircraft in Red Alert 3. This heavily armored, slow-moving Zeppelin will do tremendous damage to ground units and structures as long as it can get close enough. Use its secondary ability to fire up the Gastro burners and move across the map at top speeds, at the expense of some health. Finally, if you're going a naval route, the Soviets have the massive Dreadnought. Its 3 missile launchers can reduce any structure to rubble in no time. The missiles are slow and do not home in, so moving targets can be harder for it to deal with. Use the Dreadnought's special ability to make the missiles fire more rapidly, though this causes it to slowly take damage. If you're fighting against the Empire of the Rising Sun, make sure to use balanced battle groups, as many Imperial units can transform. Use hammer tanks and bullfrogs against the transforming mechanized units of Japan. The Bullfrog can take out the flying Jet Tengu and Chopper VX, and if they transform, the hammer tanks will take out their counterparts, the Mecha Tengu and the Striker VX. Also, use your terror drones to disrupt Imperial attempts at expanding with its undefended nanocores. Now, I'll show you how to keep your cores humming along with a few more Empire of the Rising Sun strategies in Casual 3. The Empire has a different means of accessing higher tech units than the other 2 factions. While the Soviets tech up just by building the right structures, and the Allies have area tech access through Konyards, the Empire techs up on a per-structure basis. Unit-producing structures are individually teched up by researching special upgrades available at each of the structures. The highest level upgrade first requires you to build a nanotech mainframe. This makes teching up cheaper initially, but it also demands a little more forethought when deciding which structures you want to build the strongest units. The quickest way to get ahead by playing as the Empire is to get your economy booming quickly. Rush those extra ore mines with refinery cores and set up additional ore refineries, remembering to keep enough generators around to avoid a low power state. Since the Empire has no build radius limit to them, send refinery cores out to distant nodes. Don't go too overboard, since the cores are weak and expensive. Should a refinery come under fire, your ore collector's special ability lets them fight back, so you always have some defense right away at your forward refineries. The collectors will dump out any ore they're carrying when the guns emerge, though the guns can repel an infantry attack pretty easily. So go on and grab a few remote refineries, but don't spend your credits so quickly that you run out for a main defense force back at your base. Here's another bold rush strategy. Rush a dojo core to an oil derrick, a neutral tech structure that provides a steady stream of income. Then wall in the instant dojo and derrick for protection. Build an engineer to capture the derrick for instant and continual funds. Crank out a few units for protection, and now you've got a forward infantry base that provides cash. The Empire has great early-game infantry in the Imperial Warriors and the Tank Busters. These guys are relatively cheap and deal massive amounts of damage when used against the right types of opponents. The Imperial Warrior is an anti-infantry energy rifle-wielding soldier that can cut down enemy foot soldiers quite literally with his special ability, the Bonsai Charge. The warrior stows his rifle, unsheaths a sword, and gains a speed boost. In this faster mode, the Imperial Warrior is immune to getting stunned by Allied attack dogs or Soviet war bears, and can kill just about any infantry unit. The anti-vehicle units of the Empire are appropriately called Tank Busters, and even though they can't shoot at aircraft, they can hurt ground vehicles real bad. As their special ability, Tank Busters can burrow underground to dramatically increase their armor and prevent themselves from being crushed under enemy tank treads. However, they can't fire while underground. Another way to experience the power of the Tank Buster is the use of the Empire of the Rising Sun's Sleeper Ambush support power, which causes several of these dangerous dudes to pop up wherever needed. Start harassing your opponent, load up some engineers into the Empire's personnel carrier, the Sudden Transport. This transport does not have any guns to defend itself with and is lightly armored, but it can disguise itself as any other vehicle. Try disguising it as an enemy vehicle or mix it in with a Mecha Tengu force. Drive into the enemy's base and unload the engineers, which will pull the transport's disguise. Run around and capture your opponent's buildings before he even knows what's happening. If the sudden transport blows up, it explodes violently, causing damage to nearby forces. So plant it close to something you'd rather see destroyed. Now let's get into the Empire's famous transforming units. The Mecha Tengu is an early game vehicle which can transform into the Jet Tengu to get around quickly. In its ground form, it's really good against infantry, and in its airborne form, it can dispatch other air units. Fly a group of Jet Tengus over to harass ore collectors, switching them over to Mecha Tengus by hitting the F key, then switch back and run. The mid-game Striker VX unit is also good against ore collectors when in its transformed flight form, the Chopper VX. Together, the Mecha Tengu and Striker VX are a good combo, complementing each other's abilities when in the same form. When both units are in their ground form, the VX is an anti-air unit and the Tengu is an anti-surface unit. In flight form, they switch targets, so the VX becomes anti-surface and the Tengu goes anti-air. If you're facing a unit that is anti-air only, such as the Bullfrog, transform them both into ground units. While the VX won't be able to attack, at least it won't be vulnerable, and the Tengu can take out the Bullfrog. Careful though, because you can't transform constantly. There's a brief delay that prevents you from using the transform abilities all the time. Still not convinced the Empire of the Rising Sun is a lethal killing machine? Check out these late game units.